I'm back again for another video here. Well, I'm just watching this. It's a 2-hour conversation between Eric Dubay and Pardon. He's deserved of me probably knowing his name, but I don't remember it. Um, I think he's like the leader or whatever member of We Are Change, which I've heard of, and I guess they're a pretty big organization of some sort in the truth movement. I mean, they talk about it quite a bit in the video. I'm not too much for organizations in any of these subjects. It's about the subject, not the organization to me. But anyways, it's good work, good work. So it's like a 2-hour conversation. And it's a great conversation. I really love this series from Eric Dubay. I've told him as much. I do. That's why I watch the whole things. Um, I've watched enough 2-hour, 3-hour, 4-hour, 5-hour videos. These days I don't always. There's not too much to be gleaned anymore in the truther circles. It seems. I've been at it for a while, but anyways, maybe I'm just lazy. Who knows? But the point of me making this video now is to be long-winded and to discuss a. Sorry, you can let me know, my 3 viewers, if the camera moving is just horrific for you. It's very dynamic. Now, the point is, they were talking about, some of these figureheads in the world, that are popular in media, business, wherever, politicians, science, and like, who are these people and what do they know? Um, the examples that they give are Neil deGrasse Tyson and Elon Musk. And I thought it was really interesting. I wish I was in these conversations, right? That's why I have to just do this on my own. But I'm so long-winded, it's probably best to just ramble on my own anyway. Um, Although I do enjoy conversations. Call me, call me. But uh, now, so for example, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Elon Musk, these types of people, or like politicians, whatever. I know in the truth spheres, I've had these conversations with people, and people having this conversation of like, and people who are uninitiated into these truth movements or whatever. I think they often kind of ask the big question, the simple, like, kind of blaring question to them is like, how can these conspiracies happen? How can the earth be flat and everybody's hiding it, or whatever conspiracy, and like all the governments of the world are hiding it and all these businesses are hiding it? So, it's a good question. And so we attempt to answer that. And I thought that they made some really great points. I think that these people, but what I wanted to add before I get to adding my take on it and some of my thoughts, which I just knew, trying to flesh out and get into that deep, thin cave there. It's not an easy place to explore thoughts. That's a whole nother video I would love to do about, Eric talked a fair amount there in this conversation about, like, essentially what is critical thinking, what is thinking, how to think. And that's a subject that's been on my heart for many years, and wanted to even try to teach other people. I don't know if I'm qualified, but I certainly spend a lot of time doing it. Whether that qualifies you or not, well, other people can judge. Um, but I thought it was cool. I wanted to like say it to him because he was like describing this thing, and I was like, "Let me finish your sentence," which I do with people. But you know, all these sort of ways of, well, being critical, right? He was talking about, and I was like, well, that's what critical thinking is. Like, you have to be critical, right? I guess that's sort of like, that cynicism that many of us truther people have about society, about the world, and, about evil and stuff. Skeptical, I think, is the word, rather, not cynicism. I think, yeah, cynicism's like the bad version of it, perhaps, but skepticism, um, anyways, it's being critical, right? And that's how you have your own sovereignty, your own truth, your own knowledge, your own power, authority, anything, your own position. He talked about it quite a bit. I thought it was really great, and I mean, but I just that's what critical thinking is, right? The critical part. I have to pick apart that thing, that person. Nah, it's not really about the person. More so the behavior, the action, the words, the ideas, the concept, the this whatever it is you're talking about. You have to pick it apart. You have to critique it. You have to be critical of it. How can I discern from what's true and what's not true, right? So I just wanted to add that little thing about that, like, and I thought that's kind of a good one. You could make like a nice little saying about that, that the important part of critical thinking is the critical. You have to be. It doesn't mean being mean or anything. That's separate. All right, so losing my whole point here. You could probably criticize me for that easily, easily. So, sorry, my arm getting tired here. Weak. But so these people, right? I'm just jumping around in my mind, so I hope you can follow me. I'm sure it's not that hard. I was getting into these concepts, thinking about it after them. I paused their conversation and was like, "Whoa!" And I was like, "I gotta make a video about it," because I think it's a deep and fascinating subject, and ooh, it's very close to the heart, and it can be, I think, a really difficult and well, just a difficult conversation for people who are experiencing it. I think everyone's experiencing it to a greater degree than for many people than they ever have in their entire life. But what I wanted to say to them about perhaps those two examples of Neil deGrasse Tyson and Elon Musk or people like them, the question is, do they know the truth? Does Elon know that the earth is flat? Does he really believe in space and going to Mars, So that's kind of that specific question with any of these people who are politicians or any of these people who are in main positions to proliferate and perpetrate uh, the propaganda, right? The evil onto people. Um, do they know? Do they know the truth? Or the alternatives or whatever. And of course, it's interesting. So, personally, I think lower level people don't know. The vast majority, if any of them, know. They don't know. They're just. I like some of the words. I love good conversation, even if I'm not part of it, but it makes me want to be. The good word choice. It's just a good word choice is just satisfying, and because it captures that essence, now, and really brings it home, sinks it in. So, I think people like. I gotta lie down. I hope that's not too lazy for you here, too personal, too intimate. I'm lying down. I'm not under the covers. That would be weird. So, I think people like Neil deGrasse and Elon Musk at that level, especially when you're super rich, I think that I don't know how much money you can have before you have to be like initiated somehow. I don't know. I mean, there's because of the inflation and how many billionaires and millionaires there are these days. It's not as true as it would have been before, but it's a bit dark. But like at Elon's level of wealth, if it's even real or whatever, the puppetry. But I think you have to be initiated to a certain degree, right? And Neil deGrasse Tyson, I mean, he's a pretty stupid stooge, but he's a big face of their scientism to appease the masses and proliferate a message. So I don't give him any personal credit really for what he does. He's a pathetic stooge, in my opinion. I would say he's probably not as initiated as Elon. I doubt it. He's too bubbly. But like local politicians and stuff and things like that, I don't think they know much about much. Maybe like the Premier of Ontario, they're probably initiated into some things. And we know, as far as I know, we know that the initiations of these, Freemasonry and whatever secret societies and these occult societies, they don't use those words lightly. When you're initiated into something, like how much you know is exactly what you need to know, and it's always tiers. To me, like basically there's always going to be tiers above, right, of the elite, because it's a pyramid and it gets pretty narrow, and the ones you see are not. There's almost always going to be someone above whoever you think you've identified, and then ultimately, whether you believe it's Satan or a spiritual evil power that's above even any human, right, which I think is true. So Right. So I was saying just like what you need to know. They tell you only what you need to know. It's all compartmentalized and filtered, upward or however you describe that. And I think it's a lot more effective than people realize, like working at NASA, uh, and not really knowing about the shape of the world. I mean, if you're working at data sets and these digital images, and you're just working on a computer, or heck, even if you're out there building a satellite of some sort and you're working on physical technology, you don't. How do I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean you know anything really about it. You're designing something that to you is real and it's for these purposes, and you're working off data sets and all this stuff. But are you the one going up into space? Do you know? I mean, are you out there on the boat retrieving it out of the ocean? Like, you know, I think that it's not that hard to keep it to being a very small number of people who are initiated into the secret knowledge and these types of things. And then, but to me, what I was really getting, what I think is fascinating and a really imploring subject of these times, and probably for all times, especially evil times, but for all times, is the nature of the mind. Because, we ask, well, what do these people know? And I think people in these very high positions, most of them, if not all of them, have a fractured personality, like a split personality that they've been, I don't know the ratio of how many and to what degree, but there's definitely some level of many of them being traumatized and tortured and compromised with, yes, blackmail at their back, but also, that's what the initiation is you have to partake in satanic rituals. You can't just get initiated because what? Oh, we're going to tell you some secrets and pay you, $1 million a year, and thanks for keeping the secrets, buddy. Like, it doesn't work like that. How do you think the devil works? How do you think these evil people work? They don't let things just fly by the wayside and hope that you keep the secret. No, you're initiated, which means something disgusting and horrific and evil is at your backside, reminding you, um, to just be a good little stooge. And you're going to get paid very well and feel important in society and looked up to and all that stuff, right? So you get all these rewards, but you're a compromised individual. You're living a fake life and you're doing something for the evil enemy. So it comes at a great cost, of course. But what I'm trying to get to more here is to talk about these people that are tortured and abused in horrific satanic ritual abuse, these types of things, and what it does to people's personality. Just the nature, it gets me thinking about the nature of our mind and consciousness, and how these people in higher levels, many of them have been tortured and split. Their personality is split, and so you would say, well, how much do they know? Um, and how are they able to maintain this facade and stuff? Well, I think that that's a part of it. Part of the facade is that it's a split personality. It's a dominant personality that's been created through torture and ritual. And they have handlers, these are common things I think many of the truthers know, is that the handlers. And I started to think even of my own personality and how I have a bit of a split nature. Maybe, to whatever degree, I have some split myself. And I started to think, well, there's certain things that kind of trigger it, right? Like being under the influence of, I think, alcohol or substances can enable perhaps shifting to different personalities. And what that means exactly? What exactly does that mean to shift to a different personality? To sorry about the camera. Um, so I feel, like certain, because these handlers, they might have certain words that help to bring you into certain personality, and those words will be associated with certain tortures or certain behaviors, certain rituals, and certain things, and they could be good things. Something that came to mind was like the eating of the ice cream cones, because I don't know, it seems to be a thing that these politicians are like out eating ice cream. Maybe that's something that reinforces this facade, this persona, right? This fractured self is eating ice cream. I mean, it kind of makes sense. It might. We know how things can bring us memories and take us back to a certain place. And if that certain place is a different mentality, a different self, a different person, and the whole idea of whether or not this fractured self is like a spirit harboring into your mind and taking into your body, like a demon or a spirit. I think it's totally possible, and what that means, the idea. I just saw something the other day about alcohol, which made me say, I gotta stop. And it's true, I gotta stop. Um, is that while you're under the influence, they were saying that, you know, because the way alcohol influences you, it enables you to be inhabited by a spirit. And it's I think that's totally true, or totally possible, and it may very well be true. Um, so it's just the idea of this, the torture rituals, the MK Ultra, the Monarch, the programming, right, the Manchurian Candidate, all these things, and how far does it go, and the nature. Well, they studied these things by doing it, by torturing people, and by practicing. So you can have words, you could have, I believe, also behaviors, activities, things, maybe music. A lot of different things could be associations to help reinforce and keep you in your altar, in that persona, or to switch altars or personas. Um, and because during trauma, uh, primarily what seems to be the most powerful way to do it, maybe with substances and or through trauma, you're able to get into a condition and a state, and they understand this, right, where your brain and the chemicals, it dissociates, and your mind creates like a new you, a new self, to handle that unbearable trauma of the torture of whatever it is. And whether or not that's like a spirit inhabiting you, or if those are two separate things or linked, or if it's one and the same thing, I think it's really fascinating, guys. I think it's the reason I said it's a subject that implores us is because I think it's so near and dear to the condition that we're in and why we're suffering and all these things. People are like, oh, it's the patriarchy. No, I think it's the fractured nature of ourselves and our personalities, like fractured away from God, fractured away from our authentic self. These types of things, I think, is very close, if not the top of the list of understanding who we are, how to heal, how to be in power and truth and righteousness and all these things, and how to love each other, right? I think so. So super super interesting. Just imploring, that's the word. Like we need to. And I know that many people are doing good work in these areas, but they talk about narcissism and these different things, and often it's like painting the other. It's kind of like about them. What did they do? And I want to understand the nature of what's actually happening. How is the mind, the true nature? I was raised in a church that talked a lot about this kind of stuff, about the susceptibility of the mind being like a some of the sayings were like a resonating crystal, like a control tower on the airport. All the signals, all the flights, all the stuff is through the mind. It's like a receptor, and that receptor is open to certain signals and things, not even just from yourself, right? Like that's one of the reasons of intrusive thoughts and things, and thinking just comes through your mind. And when you practice meditation, One of the big tenets is that you are not your thoughts, right? And you can even go and say, well, you're not your body, you're not your feelings. You are like this inner self, right? The seat of consciousness, which is like a spiritual, little piece of God, or you know, uh, or if you're not from God, but and and so so you're not your thoughts, but the thoughts are always whoo whoo, right, going and going, and so it's a powerful thing to think about and to understand and to try to harness that. What does it really mean? And I think it makes sense why Christianity, for example, which is one I'm very familiar with, is so, and many sects of living and religions and groups with creeds. It's about controlling the mind, right? It's about focusing the mind, because having your mind be an impenetrable fortress of righteousness and glory and beauty and love, it's probably the strongest, best way of, well, fighting against evil and upholding that which is good. And how do you do it, right? I mean, yes, the body is important and all these things are important, but what you think, what you allow yourself to think, and what you expose yourself to, you're allowing things to come into you, right? Looking into the abyss, the abyss also looks into you. And so, what do these people know? Obviously, I branch into so many subjects. It's hard to just. I think you understand though what I'm really about in this kind of subject of because when you look at like these certain figures and you say, well, what do they know and were they tortured? Are these alter selves? And the facades and all this stuff. And then I also branch it out and say, well, what about the whole humanity? What about the whole West? What about I can have different conversations about like the Western world because there are distinctions, and then the whole world. So in the last few years, I think we experienced a satanic ritual torture. It's a low level torture compared to what they do in private, in secret, but it's a torture nonetheless, right? It's a psychological, mental, emotional, physical torture. Everyone knows really that isolation is torture, and forcefully covering up the face or the head is like torturous. It's inhumane, things like that, and criminals do it, or they cover your head before they chop it off at the like it's not a nice thing. It's not a good thing. We know. So all those things in the last few years was a torture ritual to condition the people, to degrade the people, to corrupt the people, to destroy their minds, to degrade their thinking. And it totally works, right? Like they were already degraded to get to that point in the first place. And it's just a big step. It's a big wave of degradation and subjugation through torture and ritual, which fractures your personality. So, and then we're always asking, well, why do people like this? Why do people go along with it? Because they're abused. They're unaware. They're asleep. They're becoming more and more into an alter self, an alter personality, right? Because to cope with the abuse and the trauma, and they don't have the knowledge or the resources or whatever to combat it. I don't know if anyone does on a certain level, like our animal level, the human physical level. If you're getting abused, you're gonna just at a certain level, you for most people, if not anyone, is gonna split. You're gonna have a breakdown. I mean, I think if at some point some people could be strong enough to withstand this type of thing, and increasingly so. I think like you know with experience, with love, with endurance, with understanding, with all these things, and with God, you're able to withstand more, and increasingly so, I believe, over time, these types of rituals and abuses of people. But in general, people are abused and they are fractured. And when you're in the fracture, they have ways of programming your alter self to, and I think they influence it, and you kind of create it, or it gets created in your mind or whatever, from the nature of the event, the nature of the torture and the ritual, but also they give you certain associations and all these things. And then when you're operating through that, well, that's why people are so neurotic, right? That's why people are so combative and at each other's throats, and there's so much cognitive dissonance and all these things. They're all increased. It's not just mystical reasons of why it's happening. I mean, these are mystical things, but what is mystical? It's just something that's kind of like deep and spiritual and hard to understand. But they all have physical components. These things, it's a very physical thing. It's a very real thing, you know. To me, I think of spell casting and all these things as having very real physical components. And, like there is a mystical nature or whatever, because that's the power. And these people understand that. And I think, religions, at least I understand that Christianity also understands that and teaches that, which is why it's so careful about what you do and don't do. People are like, well, it's so controlling, Puritans, prudes, and they're so square and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they're trying to fortify their mind and live in righteousness and purity. You think that's easy? You have to, I think you have to exclude yourself from a lot of things in a lot of society. You have to, you know, remove exposure to these things. Um, I think it's really important. And unfortunately, it's unavoidable to some degree. And I do debate with myself these days about what's the word, just whether or not that's the truth path. Are we supposed to just do that, avoid everything, be the sheep to God and wait for God to save us? Or do we have to fortify ourselves with the power of God? He's still there with us, but take the action ourselves, do it ourselves. I don't I don't know if I know the answer. That's a whole thing to explore, but these things are all linked and they're all related, guys, and this video is getting long. It's okay. Uh, it always brings me home to the same subjects, and well, it makes me feel, you know, back to God, back to living in a better way. I have not been living in a good way, so. And but all of us guys, like that's how the devil's gonna win. That's how Satan's winning. That's how he's getting us so far to where we are, through slow degradation and subjugation, through abuse, right? And through exposure to degeneration, things like that. Um, so I think, like you can't be centrist about that stuff. I don't know. I think like I think people like perhaps myself and my ex-girlfriend here and people that I know who are incredibly intelligent people and incredibly deep thinkers about some of these subjects and have a high level of awareness of these deep truths, these truth movements, the evils in the world, a lot of these things. I think that there's a price, there's a cost that comes with that. So I don't think we want everyone to be like that, right? So because I've heard argument that, well, in order to understand these things, in order to figure it out and yada yada, you have to have some exposure. And I would say, yes, that's true. But is that what you want? Like, look at, if you have a child, do you want your child to go through the hard times so that they can learn? Like, you don't want it. To some degree, I guess they have to, but you certainly don't want it. And I think, how far you have to go in that direction. I don't know. So these are difficult things to answer. And I know these days people are so opinionated and judgmental and, oh, those old fashioned traditional patriarchal Christian whatever religious people, they don't know nothing. Modern people are so much smarter. I think a lot of that is arrogance and just foolishness. um I'm not saying all of it, I don't, but I think a lot of it. And and that's another reason why I'm not really for centrism, because if you're if you when you to me if when you're centrist about these things, I don't know, like, and I'm trying to look at all these subjects, but to me that's just allowing the evil and saying, I'm going to work with it. We're going to work with the evil. And maybe that's the position you have to take. I mean, I don't know. You can't eliminate it, can you? Obviously not. People have been trying and failing, and that's probably a bit silly to say that the road to of good intentions is paved with evil or whatever. I butchered that, but that's okay. You know what I mean. But I don't know. It's a tough one. These are like the greatest questions of our time, of our days, for millennia, or however long we've been around. Is these exact questions that people for centuries have fought, killed, and died for, and sacrificed greatly in ways that people in the West almost know nothing about. They know a little bit more about it now, a little bit more after the last few years, and some people have suffered a lot, but I think in the older times, people were much more intimately acquainted with evil and with suffering, and I think, yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting. I've always believed that there's a necessity to some degree that we experience these things. To what degree, and how far do we want to expose ourselves? It's a good question, and I don't know if I have the answer. I'm looking, I'm trying, I'm working towards that. That's what I want. I want to help and work towards that with you, with people. Um, for me personally, when the mandates came in, in the church I was raised in, uh, they teach to just turn the other cheek and to not expose yourself. And so they mostly keep to themselves, right? I mean, these are people with jobs and careers, professionals, business people, you know, and they travel and they live life and shop and everything. They're not like Amish or cloistered off people who separate themselves from society in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, they don't. But in terms of their, yeah, it's exposure to evil things like degenerate music and movies and swearing and drugs and alcohol and sex and stuff like that. Yes, they limit the exposure to those things very much, and I think that that's mostly a good thing, if not entirely. I think it's a privilege. I think that's a privilege to have, and but inevitably, I guess a person is going to have to confront these great questions on their own, and whether or not they stay in those kind of shrouded lifestyles, which I think it's for the most part a blessing. But that seems to be part of our human nature, is like to quest, to adventure, to discover, and that also means like discovering evil, right? If I'm in a church or a lifestyle or a hippie commune that's atheist, whatever they are, but you're keeping yourself away from the evils and the dangers, I don't know. I feel like part of our nature is to go and confront those evils and natures. If I knew I lived in paradise, um, in my little community, but people outside my community were all suffering, I think a lot of us would want to, sorry, like leave our paradise, and that would